Nebraska has a lightly regulated tenant screening environment with few state-level restrictions beyond the federal baseline. The governing framework includes the Nebraska Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, found in Nebraska Revised Statutes Chapter 76, Article 14, along with FCRA and the Nebraska Fair Housing Act. Nebraska gives landlords broad discretion in the screening process while providing tenants with some of the strongest anti-retaliation protections in the country. Let's start with application fees. Nebraska does not cap application fees. There is no state statute limiting what a landlord can charge for tenant screening. The Uniform Residential Landlord and Tenant Act does not address application fee amounts, procedures, or refund requirements. Landlords can charge whatever they determine is reasonable. Most Nebraska landlords charge between $20 and $40 per applicant, consistent with the actual cost of comprehensive screening reports. Nebraska's rental market is affordable relative to national averages, and keeping fees proportionate to actual screening costs is both practical and professional. Excessive fees discourage applicants in a market where the applicant pool is moderate. Criminal history screening in Nebraska is unrestricted at the state level. Nebraska does not have a ban-the-box or fair chance housing law for housing. There are no state-level restrictions preventing landlords from asking about criminal history on the initial application. Landlords can inquire about arrests and convictions, can use criminal history as a screening factor without conducting a formal, individualized assessment, and are not subject to state-mandated look-back period limits. No Nebraska municipality has enacted a local criminal history screening restriction for housing. Omaha, Lincoln, Bellevue, Grand Island, and every other Nebraska community operate under the same unrestricted framework. However, Nebraska has enacted criminal justice reforms that affect the screening context. Nebraska expanded its set-aside provisions, which function similarly to expungement, allowing certain convictions to be set aside after specified waiting periods. Once a conviction is set aside under Nebraska law, the individual can legally state they have not been convicted of the offense. Landlords should verify that their screening provider filters set-aside records from reports. Using set-aside convictions as a basis for denial creates legal risk. Nebraska also legalized medical cannabis and has been part of the broader national conversation about marijuana reform. Landlords should be thoughtful about using marijuana-related records in screening decisions, particularly for offenses involving amounts that may now be legal or decriminalized. HUD's 2016 guidance on criminal history and disparate impact applies in Nebraska. Nebraska has a growing minority population, particularly in Omaha, which has a significant African American community, as well as a large and growing Hispanic and immigrant population. Lincoln has also seen significant growth in immigrant communities from Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. Criminal history policies that disproportionately affect these populations can violate the Fair Housing Act if they lack legitimate business justification. Documenting your criteria and applying them consistently protects you under the federal framework. Source of income protection does not exist at the state level in Nebraska. Landlords are not prohibited from considering the source of an applicant's income when making screening decisions. Landlords can legally decline applicants who pay with housing choice vouchers, Social Security, disability payments, or other government assistance. No Nebraska municipality has enacted a local source of income protection ordinance. Participation in voucher programs is entirely voluntary. Lincoln has been more active than Omaha in discussing additional tenant protections, and source of income protection has been part of that conversation. Landlords in Lincoln should monitor local policy developments. For credit reports, Nebraska follows standard FCRA requirements: permissible purpose, written consent, and adverse action notice procedures. Nebraska does not impose additional state-level requirements for credit report access, adverse action content, or notification timelines beyond FCRA. Nebraska's fair housing protections under the Nebraska Fair Housing Act, found in Nebraska Revised Statutes Sections 20-301 through 20-344, prohibit discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status, mirroring the Federal Fair Housing Act. Nebraska has not added additional protected categories such as sexual orientation, gender identity, marital status, age, or source of income beyond the federal baseline. The Nebraska Equal Opportunity Commission investigates fair housing complaints and has enforcement authority. While the state fair housing law mirrors federal protections, Omaha and Lincoln have enacted local non-discrimination ordinances with broader protections. Omaha's ordinance includes protections based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Lincoln's ordinance similarly provides broader protections. Landlords in these cities must comply with the local protections. Screening decisions that appear to target applicants based on sexual orientation or gender identity can result in local enforcement actions, even though state law doesn't explicitly protect these categories. One aspect of Nebraska law that's unique and relevant to the screening context. Nebraska has one of the strongest anti-retaliation provisions in the country. Under Section 76-1439, the statute creates a one-year presumption of retaliation if a landlord takes adverse action after a tenant exercises a legal right. This is the longest presumption period in the country, tied with Iowa. While this primarily applies to existing tenancies rather than the screening process, it reflects Nebraska's commitment to protecting tenants who exercise their rights. The strong anti-retaliation framework means that landlords who screen out applicants based on their history of filing complaints or exercising legal rights at prior tenancies face significant risk. From a practical standpoint, Nebraska's rental market is concentrated in 2 metros, with the rest of the state having more limited activity. Omaha is by far the state's largest rental market. The Omaha Metro, including Bellevue, Papillion, La Vista, Ralston, and Council Bluffs across the Iowa border, has a diversified economy driven by financial services. Berkshire Hathaway, Mutual of Omaha, First National Bank, and TD Ameritrade's former headquarters. Healthcare, including Nebraska Medicine, CHI Health, and Boys Town. Technology, food processing, including ConAgra brands. Logistics, Union Pacific Railroad is headquartered in Omaha, and Offutt Air Force Base. Offutt Air Force Base, home of U.S. Strategic Command, is located in Bellevue and generates significant military rental demand. Military tenants from Offutt represent a reliable segment of the Bellevue and South Omaha rental market. Landlords should understand military income documentation, leave and earnings statements, and BAH rates. Omaha's BAH rates are moderate and directly influence pricing near the base. Omaha's rental market is competitive with steady demand and moderate rents. The city has experienced growth driven by its strong employment base and relatively low cost of living. Downtown Omaha, Midtown, Dundee, Benson, and the Exarban area have seen strong rental demand driven by revitalization and young professional interest. West Omaha and the suburban communities of Papillion and La Vista attract families and offer newer construction. Omaha's diverse population, including significant African American, Hispanic, and immigrant communities, means that screening criteria must be applied consistently and without bias. The city's demographics mean that disparate impact claims are a realistic risk for landlords who apply overly broad or inconsistent screening standards. Lincoln, the state capital and home to the University of Nebraska, has a strong rental market driven by state government, the university's massive enrollment, healthcare, including Bryan Health and CHI St. Elizabeth, and a growing technology and insurance sector. Lincoln has been one of the most active refugee resettlement cities in the country, receiving significant populations from Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Myanmar, and other countries. This creates a diverse tenant population with unique screening considerations. Screening refugee and immigrant applicants in Lincoln requires sensitivity and practical adaptations. These applicants may have limited or no U.S. credit history, may not have traditional rental references, and their income may come from entry-level employment or resettlement assistance. Having a clear and consistently applied approach to evaluating applicants with limited credit files, such as accepting co-signers, requiring larger deposits where legally permissible, or using alternative creditworthiness indicators, helps landlords serve this population fairly while protecting their interests. The University of Nebraska's enrollment creates massive student rental demand in the neighborhoods surrounding campus. Screening student applicants with limited credit and rental history is routine, and a consistent co-signer or guarantor policy is essential. Grand Island, Kearney, North Platte, and Hastings have moderate markets driven by agriculture, meatpacking, and regional commerce. The meatpacking industry, concentrated in communities like Lexington, Schuyler, Grand Island, and Madison, employs a large immigrant workforce that represents a significant portion of the rental market in these communities. Screening workers in the meatpacking industry involves verifying employment income from an industry with relatively high turnover, employer verification of current employment, and expected ongoing work is important. Scottsbluff, Norfolk, Columbus, and Fremont have smaller markets with limited applicant pools. Landlords in these communities must balance thorough screening with the practical reality of a small market. One best practice for Nebraska landlords. Even though the state has minimal screening regulation, develop documented screening criteria that can accommodate the diverse applicant pool found in Nebraska's cities. Omaha and Lincoln both have significant immigrant and refugee populations who may not fit traditional screening templates. Having clear, written criteria for evaluating applicants with no U.S. credit history, limited rental references, and non-traditional income sources ensures you're treating all applicants consistently while making fair, documented decisions. Another best practice: verify that your screening provider is current with Nebraska's set-aside provisions. Convictions that have been set aside should not appear on background reports. If your provider is returning set-aside records, the information is unreliable, and acting on it creates risk. Ask your provider specifically about their compliance with Nebraska's set-aside statute. A third best practice for landlords in Omaha and Lincoln: be aware that local non-discrimination ordinances provide broader protections than state law, including sexual orientation and gender identity. Ensure your application form and screening process don't inadvertently touch on these locally protected categories. Train anyone who handles applications on the full scope of local protections. Nebraska requires landlords to return the security deposit within 14 days of the tenant vacating, one of the shorter return periods in the country. The deposit is limited to 1 month's rent, or 1.5 months if the tenant has a pet. If the landlord fails to return the deposit within 14 days, they may be liable for the full deposit amount plus attorney's fees. The short return timeline and limited deposit cap make thorough screening critical. Your financial protection against a problem tenant is modest, so getting the tenant selection right is essential. For the complete guide to Nebraska tenant screening laws, visit tenantscreeningbackgroundcheck.com. Subscribe to our channel for every state in our tenant screening law series.